Doors there and immediately on your right, so those are there. We are live streaming the event today, so that's going to be, but we're going to pause some of that before we get onto the questions and answers for GDPR. So that's going to be happening, and obviously you're very welcome to stay to look around the exhibition at the end and to save some food at the end. The final thing is we'd ask you, if you're able to put your phones onto mute, silent, or turn them off if you're able to, just to avoid interruption going through. That would be great. I'm going to hand over now to Paul Cooper, who's our Chair of Trustees.
Thank you very much, Anton. There we are. Thank you very much, Anton. Yes, Paul Cooper, Chair of the Trustees of South Cotswold Foodbank. And I'd like to thank you all for making the time to attend this morning's launch of our new food poverty report, both for those joining us in the room and also those joining us online. I'd also like to thank Ashcroft Church for kindly hosting today's event and providing the refreshments and the lunch after the presentation today. It's also great to see the Hidden Hardship exhibition that's here, and hopefully you'll have some time over lunch to have a look around the exhibition. South Cotswold Foodbank provides support, advice and food to those in need across the South Cotswolds. We changed our name during the year to better reflect the extent of the area that we serve, including Fairford, Tetbury, Lechlade, Northleach and the surrounding villages, as well as Cirencester itself. And as well as food donations, we rely on financial donations as well, which are grants and gifts from individuals, from schools, from churches, from businesses, and grants from other charities and trusts, as well as the Household Support Fund. And we also rely on over 100 volunteers to support the work of the staff team. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of those, to thank our donors. Thank you. We couldn't do it without you, so it's really important, and thank you very much for that. And if you do want to donate to the food bank, the details of how to donate are on the back of the report. So now I'd like to hand over to Anton.
Thank you, Paul. So welcome. It's lovely to see you all here. This is our 5th South Cotswold Food Poverty Report, but it's the first one where we're named South Cotswold's Food Bank. So we started this 5 years ago, and our aim was to help inform about some of the things that we're seeing as a food bank and we're hearing about across the southern part of the Cotswold district, so that we can help with understanding about what the key issues are, who's struggling with strong food insecurity or food poverty, where the issues take place and when, and what are some of the key reasons that people are struggling with food poverty. And it's great to see some faces in the room I think have been hit with us since the very first launch of that report, and everyone since. But whether it's your first time with us or whether it's your 5th time with us, you're very, very welcome. So as I say, the purpose of today's event is not to raise awareness of what we're doing as a food bank, but actually we believe that we are stronger together. And by sharing this information, we believe we can do more to bring about our vision of a community without the need for a food bank. I've got a magic clicker. It's amazing. So when I do that, it moves forward. It's brilliant. So we're going to start by looking at what have we seen over the past year, and what has been some of the challenges as a food bank. As we do so, we recognise that the data that we've used for this has come from 2 key sources, which is the Food Bank's referral system and citizens' advice data, which has been provided to us as part of our partnership with them. So we've drawn from those 2. We've also had anecdotal evidence that we've brought into this report from our beneficiaries, but from other partners. But as we present this, we recognise the amazing work that is being done by lots of other organisations, including all of you in this room, who are working to try and help people build resilience so they don't need to rely upon food banks and in preventative ways. So we recognise the work of lots of organisations like Citizen Advice, the Churn, Clean Slate, the Food Pantry, all of these different organisations that play a huge part in our community within this work. So it's football season. So I think I can get away with saying this year has been a game of two halves. So, that's my thumb click. Oh, there we go, excellent, wonderful. So, this year we've had good news in that referrals to the food bank have reduced by 9%, which in turn has seen a reduction of food parcel provision by 7%. So actually, in real terms, that means we provided 3,257 food parcels over the year. So that's a real positive. And we'll come on to the reasons behind that as well and why we see that as a positive. And we can see that the average number of food parcels there has dropped down to 2.2 vouchers per year. So that's the lowest we've had recorded on repeat returns in the food bank's history. So that's really good. That's showing that people are not needing to come back to use the food bank as often. We see a lot of that through the work that many organisations are delivering within our community to be more preventative focused. And it's been great to see the rollout of the Citizens Advice Support First Aid Programme to support that, where organisations can get training from Citizens Advice on how to better triage or to check on the needs of people and make sure they get support earlier, but also in the resilience building work that the Food Bank and other partners have been delivering. The other half of that, though, is that actually we continue to see more and more people turn to the food bank needing help. And last year, 38% of households that used us had not needed to use a Trussell food bank before. So despite all of that resilience building work, despite all of that sort of investment in helping people to move on from needing a food bank, more and more people are needing to use us for the first time. And you might have spotted in the news recently about the growing number of people who are facing debt, who have not been in that situation before and don't know where to turn to for help. So that's an ongoing and persistent challenge. And overall, the number of unique households also rose slightly by 2.2%. So although we've seen less parcels going out, although we've seen less referrals coming in, the number of actual households we've helped has actually increased slightly. So we're seeing that pattern there of actually more households needing to use the food bank, but needing to use us for less time, hence the parcels dropping, referrals dropping, repeat returns dropping. But still that persistent need exists in our community. So these are some of the things that we've looked at which we think is happening to explain those figures. One of the things that is happening, as I've talked about, is an increase across our community in financial support and advice. The Food Bank alone delivered, alone and in partnership with our Citizen Advice funded work, delivered over £850,000 worth of financial support. So that includes checking people's benefits and making sure they were receiving what they needed, checking debt, making sure that debt was managed or written off, and other financial gains like fuel vouchers or grants, all these sort of elements within there. Over the past 2 years, that means that actually the Food Bank has delivered over £1.5 million worth of financial support, which is quite a staggering amount. But we recognise that so much else is going on as well. Other organisations, I was talking to our friends at the Food Pantry, who had delivered over £100,000 worth of benefits adjustments for people and done a lot of work there. Obviously, Citizen Advice, Clean Slate, all of you in the room will have seen some movement for helping people forward on that. But I think that that shows all of that work together, that work that we're working together in partnership is making a difference. So that's really encouraging. And that leads into our joined up work. One of the things that I know that I've seen since I started at the Food Bank back in 2021 is a real push for partnership and collaboration between organisations to make sure that no one falls through the gaps. And I think that's really exciting to see that that collaborative work really is paying off and making sure that support gets out there. But, as Paul's already mentioned, we're in the Hidden Hardship exhibition. Hidden hardship continues to be a real challenge. And that's not just hardship that's hidden because we don't see it, it's because people don't know where to turn to for help. And recently we looked at a piece with the Guardian newspaper, and actually we could see that firsthand, where so much social housing is hidden in little communities which are cut off from support and maybe don't reach out for help because of embarrassment and stigma, and they're not spotted by others because people are not necessarily in those spaces to work. So that collaboration is really important, not just between the organisations that sit within Cirencester, but those schools, churches, organisations, grassroots, community cafes that are out within those spaces to help us understand more about who needs help. And of course, we can't forget all of that amazing work that's being done by other food models, such as the Cirencester Pantry, Food for Thought, Long Table, who have a Pay It Forward model, all of those different organisations that are also giving out some food support, even if it wasn't their reason for being. Food support isn't necessarily the reason these organisations exist, but they are making enabling people to have affordable food models. So all of these different things, along with lots more, is helping to drive down the number of repeat returns to the food bank. But as I say, the issue still persists. So we started the South Cotswold Food Poverty Report 5 years ago. So we thought, as part of this year's report, we wanted to take a bit of a deeper dive into what's been happening over those 5 years. And I think what we saw was not surprising, but I think helps us through education and information to think about some of the people who might get lost within the system. And the key things that we found within the report is that over the last 5 years, 11.5% of food bank beneficiaries who access support this year also access support for the previous 5 years. Now, it's important to point out that the food bank provides time-limited support in each period of need. So this isn't that people are using us weekly for a 5-year period, and it's not necessarily that the people are in the same crisis or urgent need as they were in previous years. It might be employment 1 year, it might be health another year. But this repeating continuous need is something that we feel needs raising. 29% of households needed to use us consecutively for 3 years. And a smaller 2.2% needed to use us for 7 years. And whilst 2.2% might seem small, behind those numbers is a person, is a family, is a household who has been trapped needing to use a food bank for a very long period of time. And that's just not right, that they're still struggling not to have enough income to afford the essentials and needing to rely upon food banks. So the consistent use, and just to highlight, this doesn't go into those households who might rebound and get stabilised for a little bit of time, but then find themselves in a crisis again. This is consistent use over that period of time. So this consistent use shows that underlying the drivers of poverty, there are issues such as health challenges, disability, or severely constrained incomes, which have not been addressed by short-term interventions. And the efforts possibly to build financial resilience for those households have not reached a point where they can still afford the essentials. And we're going to come on to that and why we think this is really important for our work in the community together at the end of our presentation. Some of the reasons we've found that households are more likely to use the food bank is health. Households with poor health are disproportionately affected by either worsening physical, mental, or disability conditions. And obviously, I'm sure you'll be aware that if you have a health condition or disability, it significantly limits the ability to work. It leads to increased costs for heating of home or running essential equipment, and can entangle households in complex benefit processes before they receive the support that they need in order to manage. So whilst we see debt as being a key theme through these longer term users, often the debt is a result of the health issues for long-term users, rather than being separate from them. The health is causing the debt, which is then making things worse and worse. As I say, some of the challenges we've seen there is a long time it takes to access benefits around health before people can stabilise themselves. So this ultimately reflects a systematic failure rather than individual failure. These households we've talked with are not returning because they have not tried hard enough to resolve the issues that they are facing. They're returning because systems intended to provide security to them, healthcare, benefits, housing and work, just do not reliably support them when life becomes more complicated. And we think, and as I say, we'll come on to this later, we think that this is important because it's essential that we design systems that go beyond short-term crisis support for households like this that find themselves in long-term negative budget and cannot, through their own means, break free of it, even with resilience building. So we're going to move in now to looking at a few different elements. First, we're going to look at who is most at risk of hunger in the South Cotswolds. So the first thing we found is that 62% of adult households, 62% of referrals were for single adult households. This, in our mind, makes them a very vulnerable group, and I'm sure if any of us think about it, we can see why. A single adult household has one income to rely on, or one set of benefits to rely upon. But their expenses are pretty much the same as a two-adult household. The same broadband costs, the same water costs, the same pretty much energy costs, maybe a little lower. A house for one person is not much smaller than a house for two people, but the costs are the same. The council taxes are reduced, but they're still quite hard to manage. All of these sort of things put pressure on single adult households. So without that second income or shared costs, even more small financial changes, therefore, can trigger crisis for them. What we found as well is that within this group, single-parent families are a very vulnerable group. So we're going to come on to families in a moment separately, but it's really important to recognise that, again, single-parent families make up a big proportion of that group that are being referred to us. First, it's single adults, and the second biggest group, single adults. So, what we found within that is where it's a single parent family, the person referred is most likely to be a woman. And again, that probably isn't surprising to many people. Often, that is the person who is the caregiver in the relationship. But that flips on its head when it's a single adult alone, when they are much more likely to be men. So where you've just got a single adult in the household, 56% of single adult households were men. That's fallen somewhat from last year, and that's been really interesting for us as to why there has been that drop. We do know that our friends at the long table obviously have a wonderful pay it forward model, and we do know that they've picked up a number of people who go there for the free lunches, who are single men, for not just the meal, but for community and socialisation. So that's been interesting. We obviously don't know, as they don't keep names and things like that, whether or not that has any correlation with our decline there. But that is interesting. But obviously, part of it will also be the great resilience work that's happening. So there's some great work there happening with people across the board, which has helped single men out of the challenges they've faced. So as I say, a big proportion of referrals into Foodbank are families. So 56% of our referrals in total were families. So that accounts for some of those single adult families that we talked about earlier as well. Again, what's quite interesting, we've heard a lot in the news recently about the two-child benefit cap, and whilst we did see a number of families who used us, which was disproportionate to the number of 3+ child households in the area on the census, so we have more than we would expect given the number of 3+ child households, we see an awful lot of families with less than 3 children. And I think that's really important for us to recognise, because whilst some families with the removal of the two-child benefit cap will see an improvement this year, there's going to be a lot of households who never had that many children who are already struggling. So 2 adult families made up 25% of referred households, but the majority of them only have 1 or 2 children. And we see that also within the single parents. So we probably won't see the same shift we might see in the coming year with that. And of course, some of those 3+ child households will still hit benefit caps, which means that they won't see major difference within the income. There might be limits there anyway. So what that shows us is that despite a lot of focus sometimes being on larger families, small families still need to meet those basic needs. And we'll come on to when and where, but this is particularly apparent at times of periods such as the school holidays, where people are in higher need. And we're going to come on to that in a moment. So it continues to raise the cost of raising children as a key driver towards being on very, very low income or even negative budgets. And the last thing we wanted to highlight within this section in the report is that food insecurity is not just limited to those who are out of work. And the normal sort of picture of food bank use might be for someone who isn't working or refuses to work or has benefits. And actually, we can see from our data that 33% of households who used us in the past year had some form of income, either through employment alone or alongside benefits that were topping that up. These households were more likely to cite rising costs, and I'm sure for all of us we recognise that. Despite today, the inflation figures showing that food inflation has dropped, we've still got a big rise from the 1st of July on energy. We've got the fuel costs, which have gone up as a result of the Iran war. The water costs have gone up this year. Every which way you slice it, the cost of essentials, living essentials, is rising. And working families are finding simply their income is not meeting up with that demand. We're going to hear from someone who is using credit cards to pay their bills, and that is a real fact of life for some people, which is not a solution and actually can end up in further debt, but it's actually what reality is like for some working families who are trying to make ends meet. So we're going to look now at when and where do we see food insecurity peak, or actually, a little bit in our report, where don't we, and why do we think that that might be something that we need to focus in on? So the first thing, when do we see food poverty increase? Well, actually, there's some real clear periods during the calendar year when food poverty and food bank referrals increase. The first and most noticeable is in December, in that run up to Christmas. What's interesting about this is we would expect probably food bank referrals to increase over the winter, generally, because it's a time of increased costs for energy and heating and all of these sort of elements. But actually, that's not the case. We actually see generally that around December, they're at similar points. But as we approach December, they peak quite significantly. And the peak is 67% higher than our average food bank parcel line. And we've got to remember also that average is lifted up by those peak periods. So actually that's a higher average there as well. So what we're seeing now is that probably Christmas is a big driver, and that's understandable. I know myself, coming from a household with a disabled father whose mother was a carer, they had no money, we had a derelict house, we had no heating, but at Christmas, I still had stockings full and presents under the tree, because people want to make sure when they have children that they are giving all that they can to those children. And so it's understandable that they want that for their family, and they also want a lovely Christmas dinner and to celebrate with friends. And so that's something I don't think we should be judging people on, but it is a reality that therefore that does also see a spike in additional need, where people are spending perhaps beyond their means. The other area we see spikes is around the school holidays. And the Foodbank, as you might know, has been doing an awful lot of work through its family engagement work to work with schools to try and address the challenges that families within the school setting see that need to turn to food banks. And it's been really great to partner with the Churn Community Hub for that work alongside their family engagement work there as well. And that is helping to actually turn the tide upon those high those high food bank referral families coming through to us. But there are some challenges going forward. We're seeing those high peaks still, and that was when we had free school meal holiday vouchers still in place, which came out, you might remember Marcus Rashford back in, still on the football theme, aren't we? Back in 2021, really advocating for that. Those were funded first out of the COVID fund and then the household support fund locally. Those have all stopped. So there is now no provision that we're aware of going through the summer holiday for families on free school meals. Now, not every family on free school meals is going to need that support over the summer holidays, but for others that are taking time off work to care for their children and therefore have no income, along with those additional costs of the children being at home, the additional costs for energy, for making sure they're fed, that really creates a bit of a challenging time. So we see quite a lot of peaks during that period as well. And we'll come on to some of the things we think could be done as a result of that at the end of our presentation. So let's look at where. And what's really interesting here is that we can see quite clearly where food bank need is high because the referrals come through. What we don't see is where food bank might be needed or other support might be needed, but the referrals do not come through. What we can see is that demand for food banks is not evenly distributed across our district. There's a clear concentration in urban centres. So Cirencester, Tetbury have the biggest concentrations of food bank referrals. That doesn't just reflect greater population density, but greater access to support, because a lot of support services organisations are based within the main towns, within Cirencester, with some pop-ups potentially within Tetbury and the wider area. But looking at census data, we can also see that there's a connection here between social rented housing. So where you have the three things aligned, social rented housing, population density, and access to support, that's where the highest referral numbers are. Now, we recognise that social housing referrals to the food bank do not mean that that is only where support is needed, because of the fact that actually private rentals and people forced into private renting because social housing is not available are paying an awful lot. Most of their income goes on that private renting. But we just don't have the stats to back that up. But that's where we think there's some gaps. And we definitely see gaps in our outlying rural areas where we have quite a high density of social housing, but lower referrals. And that is most prominent in the east of our district, towards Fairford and Lechlade and the outlying villages there. Again, some of our work recently has looked at the density of social housing. It's quite surprising to see where it's hidden within our communities, places where you wouldn't necessarily expect. And sometimes it's really high density and sometimes spread out, which makes that access to support even greater. And it might be something, therefore, to consider as we work for place-based models, which the Crisis and Resilience Fund is looking at, as to whether or not there's a method there to really look at putting place-based models into areas where the social housing is highest density, Before moving on to look at where the next groups are, because we might find that that actually is where we get the most opportunity to reach those who are most in need. So our final section is what are the drivers behind hunger in the South Cotswolds? And we're going to hear from someone now. Oh, sorry, Andy, I spoke over the start of that video. Can we skip back one and start again? That's my fault. And we might need a little bit more volume, so I'll turn myself off. So we're going to hear now from Emma, who has used the food bank and been supported both by our support services work and our family engagement worker. And this, I think, this story we've used with permission, we've changed the details of the person, but we thought it was really useful because it really highlights some of the things we're going to talk about now, about what the drivers are for food poverty in the area.
Emma was a single mum, working full-time and financially secure, providing a stable life for her son. But in 2024, disaster struck.
I have worked all my adult life. I was enjoying my best life, so was my son. All of a sudden, literally in a moment, everything changed. I sustained a significant brain injury. I was in hospital for many weeks. My son had to go and live with his father as I could not care for him.
While still recovering, Emma lost her job.
I was made redundant. My car was a works vehicle, so was taken back.
Emma went from a £40,000 salary to universal credit.
I used credit cards to help pay bills. Eventually, I was awarded universal credit, but then it was sanctioned.
As Emma began to recover, she became part of a blended family.
I moved in with him and his children. My son also came to live with us. I was happy, but financially very broken, in debt up to my eyeballs. There were bailiffs at the door, no money, very little food. We lived in absolute poverty. I dreaded waking up every day.
The family were supported by the food bank, where they met Sharon, its family engagement worker.
Sharon has never left us, never judgmental and always smiling. She was really good at prompting me, helping me to word answers.
With Sharon's support, Emma attended an assessment on her capability to work. She was awarded limited capability for work, with backdated payments. Following this, she was also awarded the enhanced rate of the personal independence payment following an appeal.
This is life-changing for us. We can finally breathe freely. We're not hiding from bailiffs.
In 2026, Emma and her family have begun to rebuild.
We were married in a beautiful setting, and I now have my mobility car.
With the right support, Emma and her family have moved from crisis towards stability.
Without Foodbank, we wouldn't be in our better place. We wouldn't be able to smile as much as we do now.
Just checking Andy doesn't need to turn me back down before I start speaking and blow your eardrums out. So I think Emma's story, which she gave to us through a diary which she kept over a 2-year period and sort of chronicled her journey, really highlights, and that was just a small part of it, really highlights some of the challenges there, going from a stable job, because of health issues, losing that £40,000 a year salary as a single mum, into needing quite some serious help and then not being able to return to work. The redundancy, the loss of the car, which then suddenly means that transport is an issue. And while starting to rebuild by coming into a new relationship for a blended family, the challenges behind the debt that had been accrued sort of following them into that and having to really fight for those benefits that actually she was entitled to make sure that she got what she needed to support her with her disability, her long-term health issue. But obviously a journey they continue on, but one that has at least a positive outcome for them, but so many who struggle to continue engaging with the support that's needed in order to see that outcome. So some of the things that we've said about within that story is one we've touched on already, is the increased cost of food and other essentials, making it really difficult just to live from day to day. So 68% of households that were referred in cited increased costs or unexpected expenses, or the increased cost of dependence as a driving factor there. So a lot of just the general sort of swell of cost of living continuing to rear itself. But as we say, that affects even that 33% of households that had that impact. So it's quite a challenge that people are just struggling with those basic essentials day to day. The other key thing that we continue to see and have done over the years and continue to report on is the high number of people who have health issues that are being driven to the food bank. It's been really great to see the outcomes for a lot of households this year through our work with citizens advice, but also the work that we've been doing through our own support services to achieve benefits like the UC50 part of universal credit, so that people can access that, or personal independence payment, so that they can actually live as they need to and afford some of the things that they need to. So that's actually seen that number drop a little bit this year because we've managed to move people on, but it's still a persistent issue. And some of the things that we see which are challenging is that there's not a lot of other support out there. Actually, we've lost a lot of the support that might have been sort of a more regular Meals on Wheels sort of support, support in the home for people. That's getting pulled back more and more. And so that's sort of then falling back on the food bank, which isn't the right place for long-term support for people with health conditions. The food bank parcel was never meant for sort of this long-term support within that model. So that's something I think we really need to seriously consider. How are we helping those people who have long-term health issues? And I think mental health continues to be a key there. I was talking with my friend Mary at the food pantry, who has employed a counsellor now, to actually support those people within the network that she works within, because there's just not other support out there. So all of these things shouldn't be being left to small organisations and charities, but that's the reality of where we're at. And I'm sure many of you here in the room today who are heads of charities or organisations are seeing that you've had to take on more of that as well. But it is a real challenge. Citizens advice, as we refer on to them, obviously can do a deeper look at people's needs. And they found that 62% of those they worked with had a long-term health issue or a disability. So actually, there's probably that figure that we've said of 37% is probably higher. It's that we're not being that deep in our conversations with those who use the food bank, because we recognise it's taken a long time for them to build trust to ask for help. But we're seeing that even more as they reach the food bank. And we can see the work there that actually CA have done as well, that personal independence payments work is in their top 5 key benefits areas. It's number 3, so it's really high up. Actually, sorry, it's number 2. It's really high up there in the work they're doing, which is that growth. The next one is, I've pulled a few things together from the report here, but it's energy and housing costs. It's those real cost of living, general day-to-day things, and housing costs, which cause debt. So we're seeing more and more people, and I know in Citizens Advice Impact Report, which was released earlier this year, I want to say earlier this year, might have been late last year, but actually negative budgets were a real key theme, and that's something we're seeing within the food bank and nationally is growing. The Citizens Advice Red Index is really showing that issue with people being in negative budgets consistently. So we're seeing that real challenge between debt, and some of the key things that we've seen from our citizens advice work is fuel debt, council tax arrears, credit and charges, housing association rent arrears, water supply. All of these are housing and real essential sort of debts that people are finding themselves in. It's not that they've overspent, these are essential living costs that are driving these issues. And the other one we want to continue to raise is the challenges around transport and rural access. Because actually it does restrict access to support. If people can't get access into our hubs, then they can't get access to support. They've got to come all the way into Cirencester for the job centre, all the way from Letchlade, all the way from Tetbury. We've got a long journey time within all of these sort of elements just to access sort of the essentials that they need to support them. If they need to access low-cost food, whilst there are supermarkets which are lower cost, the lowest cost food support through organisations which are on our estate here, not to name them, but you need to get into Cirencester, and that's often multiple bus journeys and outweigh the cost of actually getting in. So, In the final section, we're just going to look at what do we think are some priorities we can be working together on to try to address these risks going forward. One of the things I do want to say is that this doesn't mean that we've solved the problems that we've reported on in previous years. There's still ongoing issues that we need to be looking at. You know, the benefit system overall needs look at, but that's slightly outside of our control within this room. So we're focusing in a little bit more on what we can do locally, at least within the county, on what we can do together. So these risks are things that we think still pertain despite the fall in food bank use, and we think that if we can work together to address them, we can sustain that reduction in food bank use and ultimately end the need for food banks. So the first one we're going to look at is affordability and income security. Obviously, throughout the report, we've seen the impact of affordability on households, and I'm sure even in this room, we're recognising the cost of living is increasing. But we see that as a key driver for food insecurity. The uncertainty at the moment around energy creates a risk for households on low incomes. Will face rising costs without corresponding increases in income. One of the things that we think is important, therefore, is continued access to affordable or protected tariffs for low-income families and households that recognises that ongoing financial pressure is not just a short-term crisis, but actually needs long support. And we raise that because we are seeing contraction within the social tariff market that is shrinking. And therefore people have less access to low-cost essentials that need them. I think that there's also things that within the Crisis and Resilience Fund, we know that energy is a core part of that to those households that are on oil or off-grid. But actually there might need to be some thought given towards that as to how that can be sustainable for others who are struggling. Talking of the Crisis and Resilience Fund, we're really pleased to see that is being introduced, and we strongly welcome that. That's something that Trussell and Joseph Raintree Foundation and others have been calling about, to actually align crisis payments with resilience building, which is really, really important, and actually looking at how we can become more preventative as well within that process. But one of the things we think the report clearly shows is that food poverty and crisis is often persistent rather than short term. And there is a big challenge here that with the Crisis and Resilience Fund, which is designed for more short-term cash-style payments and then resilience building, that actually it doesn't stay with that person long enough. I'm sure we're all aware of, because of budget constraints, often families or households are presented with, you can have 6 sessions of this support. The story we just heard from Emma lasted over 2.5 years with Sharon, our family engagement worker, working with them until they were in a place to actually be resilient and able to move on with their lives. And some way we need to think about how we don't lose, therefore, these long-term crisis issues within short-term support. And so we think that it's really important, therefore, that we're all about collaboration. So, it's not unusual that we would say this, but actually it's so important that we, as local delivery organisations, we collaborate together, and then especially with the local authority to make sure that that Crisis and Resilience Fund continues to be shaped. It may already have been shaped for year 1, but in year 2 and year 3, working to make sure that actually those who are delivering crisis and resilience or working within that sphere are heard and listened to. And we feel that that's really important to do collaboratively so that that voice is heard. Only then do we think that we can work to make sure that this long-term support that is needed is implemented. Next slide. One of the things that we've also seen within the report is that the demand shows very clear seasonal variation within food bank need, with consistent increases in predictable periods. It's not a surprise, this is multiple years that we've seen this pattern of food bank use happen. So it's not just driven by unexpected events, but by predictable periods. So actually, we think as a food bank, it's important, again, for us to work together within the community to support households to prepare for those known periods of where support will be needed. We don't want to just start thinking about helping people budget for Christmas in November. We need to start thinking about that in June, which is a bit of a weird time to do that, but actually that's the way we need to prepare for it, and to help them understand that each year it's going to get more expensive because inflation is erratic. So that's going to change. But we also think that it's really important those most vulnerable are supported in the school holidays. The removal of the holiday free school meal vouchers is a concern to us. We recognise from September more people will be helped by having free school meal support, and not all of those will be in need of vouchers over the summer. But there isn't really a plan in place now to support that. And the holiday activity and food programme was a great programme. Not enough people are able to access it or do access it to suggest that the food element of that is going to help them cover the summer support. So we think that actually there needs to be a conversation both locally and with our local authority about how we can make sure that support is brought to the front. And again, collaboration is a theme. Well, together is one of our sort of mantras, really, isn't it? So therefore, one of the key things that we want to call for is that continued partnership. We have a vision to end the need for a community without the need for food banks, and the need for food banks locally. We can't do that alone. We're really keen. This data comes from a lot of what we've seen and talked to other partners with. We'd love to come together to present your data within this to create a fuller picture within our report. We want to raise our voices together to make sure, especially as we come to a unitary authority where we risk losing some of our local voice, we are heard as a community. We need to do that collaboratively. That's the best way we feel we can do that. And in that way, hopefully, we can make sure that we can sustain the strong progress that we've all started already, and make sure that that doesn't fall backwards. That brings me to the end of my presentation with you. We are going to have a time for questions now, and it's one thing I realised I forgot at the beginning, so you've probably missed